Hi, folks. Almost anytime somebody has a race coming up and you're talking to them about that race, one of the things they're very likely to say is, I hope I don't start too fast. I always start too fast. I can't control the pace at the beginning. And that's a real problem. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I always start at the right pace in a race, because I certainly get wrapped up at sometimes, and I don't do that. But one of the reasons that we tend to start too fast, besides the adrenaline and other people, is that we might work a lot at our training, but we don't always work a lot at what pace is like. And pacing is a learned skill. Very few people, if any, are just born knowing what an 8-minute pace feels like, or a 10-minute pace, or whatever it is. It's something you have to kind of learn and teach your body. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the fine art of learning pace, because you can learn pace and you can do a better job within your races and your training as you consciously work at learning pace. So I just had a race. It wasn't actually a race. It was a half marathon, but my goal was to use it as a really hard training run, not a full-out race. So some of the pace I'm going to show you, it was also a little bit easy for me to hit those, so I wasn't worrying about being dead at the end, because that wasn't the goal. And sometimes you can't hit a pace not because you don't know pace, it's because you're done. The race is over. But my goal for this race was I wanted my first 8 miles to be about a 7:45 pace. Then I wanted to take it down 5 seconds a mile all the way through, unless I wasn't feeling it, because it was a humid day. I wanted 7:40, 7:35, 7:30, 7:20. Actually, it's a 10-second drop, and down to 7:15. So that was kind of my plan going into the race. Felt pretty good. What I actually did was not 7:45, 7:44. Then 7:40, which my plan was, 7:34, almost the 7:35. 7:27, whoops, that's just a touch fast, but I'm not splitting hairs over that. Gave some back the next one, and then pretty much right on again at the end. So I was very, very happy with the pace execution. But what allowed me to be able to do that is because I do conscious practice. I do things over many, many years, to fine tune and work on pace. In fact, I really believe one of the things that helped me is I probably have close to 20 years under my belt before GPS watches became a thing. And I really think that reliance on GPS tends to screw a lot of people up and can interfere with your learning to pace. And I've got some background on not having to do that. But we'll talk about the GPS. So when you're learning it, I'm going to say ideally you do it without GPS. So let me first talk about why you would do that ideally without GPS. In my personal experience, I've never seen stats on this, studies, but in my personal experience, GPS is going to be plus or minus about 10 seconds. Meaning, if you just ran a mile in 9 minutes, you might have been as fast as 8:50, you might have been as slow as 9:10. So you got a 20-second swing in what that could be. And it's not going to be always plus or minus the exact same every single mile. It can bounce all over the place. And that's what I mean. When you rely too much on GPS, and sometimes you don't have a choice, it can be tough to feel what it's like. Because if you're running a race, there's a big difference between running at an 8:50 pace or running a 9:10 pace. So the way GPS works, unless they change things, is you got a big circle. I think that circle is about 15 feet in diameter. It might be 15 meters. And you can see I got a bunch of dots in there. So what happens is when you turn your GPS watch on, it's grabbing satellites. You might have 5 or 6 satellites. You might only have 2 or 3. Generally, the more satellites you have, the better. But every satellite thinks you're kind of someplace within that circle. And they've got algorithms running in the background that are taking a look at all these dots and trying to figure out where in the world is Mark within this circle. That's one reason why GPS tends to be a little bit more accurate as you go on within the mile than at the very beginning, because it has more data. So what happens is, here's my rough drawing. Your circle is moving forward. It's overlapping because you're constantly getting signals from that. And generally speaking, as long as you're going in a fairly straight line, GPS tends to be fairly accurate because that circle is moving straight. What really goofs it up is when you get a curve and you do the curve, GPS tends to see that circle going straight for a while because of where those dots are and anywhere within it. And all of a sudden, oh, they're over here. And it kind of swings it around. So if you watch, generally speaking, every time you take a turn, your GPS watch is just going to be a little bit more off because of that circle and how it has to swing around. So that's one of the reasons why GPS isn't always going to be the most accurate. So what can you do to find something accurate, known distance? Well, a track is the best thing. Not everybody has access to a track, but tracks are measured, so you know exactly how far you're going. You might have some other measured course. One of the things I did prior to GPS is I would take my bike. I had measured my bike to know how far a mile was with the little magnet on the wheel and things like that. And I went out and I mapped like a 6-mile route in my neighborhood, so I knew exactly where the half-mile and mile marks were, so I knew what I was doing. I drew footpod up underneath measured, I think, before GPS. So most footpods, in particular a stride footpod, and I assume the Garmin, are actually more accurate than GPS because the dots don't exist. They know exactly where you are. You're on your foot, and they tend to measure distance a little bit better. I don't think you should go out and buy a foot pod just for that, but if you have one, that tends to be more accurate. And then finally, GPS, which a lot of us are going to have to rely on, ideally when you're going straight, because GPS is going to be a little bit more accurate when you're straight. Now, a couple other things on GPS. I would turn off instant pace. I hate instant pace. Go back to those circles. When you're doing instant pace, it's giving you data based upon all these dots in there. It doesn't know where you are. So in my experience, instant pace tends to fluctuate pretty wildly because there's not enough data. When you use lap pace, I have found that it takes the first quarter mile or so before I feel relatively good about what GPS is telling my pace is, because it's got a lot more data in there. So my recommendation is don't use instant pace, use your lap pace if you have to use GPS, and realize it's going to be a little bit off. So what else do you do? So you've got to have some conscious thought about kind of feeling the rhythm in your footfalls and your cadence. And if you're running 8 minutes or 9 minutes or 10 minutes or 12, whatever it is, understanding what that feels like. And what we tend to do is kind of look at our watch or look at the track and see if we're on pace and not thinking about what does that feel like so that we can replicate that without having to look at the watch. In fact, a couple of good runs that you can do when you get better at this are no peak runs. The first example of a no peak run is you make the decision that for that first lap or mile, you probably have auto lap set to a mile, you're not going to look at your watch. So if you're supposed to be running a 9-minute mile, you're going to go out and you're going to try and run 9, understanding what that feels like, and you will not look at your watch. When auto lap goes off, you might glance and say, oh, that was 8:50. That was faster than I thought. Okay, I've got to back this off a little bit, and kind of learn next time it goes off. But you're running by the feel of what that's like and checking in every mile. Once you get better at that, you can try doing an entire workout like that. If you're supposed to run 5 miles at a 9-minute pace per mile, try and do the entire run without ever looking at your watch. Then look back and say, well, how close was I to that? Because that's focusing you or causing you to kind of focus in on, again, the rhythm, the footfall, the cadence, and what does that feel like? So the net result of all this is that feeling the pace is a learned skill, but you have to take the time to consciously try and learn it.